Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
In this analysis episode, I'm going to recount recent meetings with clients and discussions with IoT design houses to discuss the current state of the art in data analytics and IoT deployments.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is made possible by sales of my book, IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, and the IoT Inc. Certified IoT Professional, or ICIP, online training and certification program. Become a certified IoT professional by completing the program's 3 courses: ICIP Technology, ICIP Business, and ICIP Strategy and Digital Transformation. Details of which can be found at www.iot-inc.com. That's www.iot-inc.com.
Welcome to the 4th Analytics Podcast. In these podcasts, which I alternate with my interview podcasts, I analyze something. That's the Analytics Podcast part. I analyze sometimes something I see in the news, which I did with the earlier ones. Sometimes it'll be something that I'm working on. In particular, the last time it was on ecosystems versus platforms. And also I'll analyze some things that I'm seeing in the real world. Let's say the field. I do consulting work with companies that are building IoT products, also with vendors. And so I'm getting some pretty good first-hand experience in what's going on out there. Today I'd like to talk about data analytics. The title of this podcast is Data Analytics Step 2 in IoT Deployments, and that's okay. And so what I mean by this is, let me explain. So I've been seeing a bit of a pattern. 2 days ago, I was speaking to a large design house out of Chicago. So they design IoT connected products. I think they said they had around 200 people, over 200 people in their organization. They got some big name clients, such as John Deere, one of the marquee IoT product companies. What we were discussing, and at least as part of the conversation, we're discussing the lack of interest in analytics. Now, it could be what they were saying is that a lot of customers are coming to them more in reactionary mode. They're seeing their competitors have an IoT product. They call it an IoT product or Internet of Things or whatever it might be, connected product. And then they come to the design house to help them IoT-ize their product as well. But what they were saying is that there's very little appetite for analytics. It's really they just want to connect the product to the phone. Now, maybe a little bit of history here would be useful. In this particular case, the design house came from the mobile industry. As we've seen, in different podcasts, actually a number of the podcasts, if you go to iotinc.com and you just look at the category design house, you'll see, I think I have like 5 or 6 interviews with different design houses. And that is actually one theme, that they did start as mobile developers. And then it was kind of a natural evolution, right? You go from mobile development into connected product development. And I think that might be part of the issue. Now, last week, I was also in Chicago, and this time I was with one of my product clients. So we're building an IoT product. In that particular situation, there is a lack of data scientist talent within the organization. So as we're going through the process of defining the requirements, we're going through the business planning of it, and we're defining the requirements of the IoT product. Again, they have more of a connected product. We're facing the situation where things that we want to do are not possible. And so the question on the table right now is, should we halt our development or halt our release, wait till we get the analytics in there, or should we just, continue on? Both these cases, I believe, really come down to the difference between an IoT product and a connected product and a smart product, or even some are calling them smart connected products. It's a nomenclature thing, but I think it's an important difference. I think you've heard me just in the last couple minutes talk about connected products and IoT products. I like to at least give you my views as what the differences are between them. For me, a connected product is something like what the design firm has been doing, the design house has been doing up with John Deere. For John Deere, it's connecting a phone or some sort of mobile device to a product so you can turn it on and turn it off, or do whatever you want to do it, actuate it. Now, this is something that I was doing actually with my company when I was CEO 8 years ago. We were developing a platform to allow fixed line service providers to offer connected home capabilities. Ours was more in the networking. It was to provide to get through the net easily. But as part of that, we built a platform. So using proxying, reverse proxying, I was standing, for example, in Tokyo at KDDI, which is a large service provider there, doing a demonstration with my iPhone 1, where I could press a button and turn lights on and off or fans on and off in a room in Montreal where our office was, halfway across the world. And with the camera, I could show the folks in the room this connected product, this connected product capability. So it's kind of been done. And I think today, really, that seems like, to me, there's not that much incremental value there. Connecting a product, yeah, you can connect the lights and turn them on and off, or maybe your air conditioning. But I almost see that as more of an evolution of a product. And I think that's almost an expectation now of consumers, or it doesn't seem like it'd be something that you would pay a lot more for. Yeah, maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't, but I think a connected product is something that there's not a lot of incremental value, and so I certainly do not guide my clients in that direction. Let's talk about a smart product now. Smart products have been around for 30 years. When I think of a smart product, I'm generally thinking localized intelligence, some sort of embedded system. Again, a smart product with local intelligence is different than obviously a connected product, but it's not what I think of as an IoT product. For me, when I think about an IoT product, I think of a product that, by definition, utilizes the full strength of the internet to create value, create that incremental value. The way I look at an IoT product is that you virtualize the hardware in a way that you can interface it with the internet. And how I see the virtualization of this hardware is by creating a software version of it. And I call it a software-defined product. The software-defined product consists of a model, and it consists of the application. So the software-defined product, along with analytics, is what I call the trinity of value. It's where you're creating value. So let's think about where value is created in an IoT product. All incremental value in an IoT product comes from transforming its data into something useful, into useful information. And to transform that data, you really do need you need to connect up to the internet, and you need to transform, let's say it's going to be data coming from sensors, but it could also be coming from microservices on the internet, such as weather, stock prices, whatever the case may be. Using that data and then using analytics, which is generally analytics. It could be the app if it's in a real-time situation, and so you're kind of doing real-time app analytics. But generally, it's using analytics to transform that data. So going back to the smart and the connected and the IoT products, I just like to put that out there, that I think there is a distinct difference. So looking at it this way, if you do believe, which I do believe, that all incremental value from an IoT product comes from transforming its data into useful information, that transformation part is a key word here. And that transformation part comes from analytics. So analytics, in looking at it from this perspective, is really key to value creation for an IoT product. Now, if we go back and we think about the different types of analytics, just to go through them, I like to look at it as past, present, and future. So you're always having to look at past data. Now, the past data could have been super super recent, like real-time data, but you're always looking at past data. You need to accumulate data to gather any useful insights, because what you're doing is you're building models. I'm not gonna get into model building too much in this particular episode, but I just want to go through the different types of analytics before I move on. So descriptive analytics, and we've had podcasts. So we've had a specific, no, it wasn't a podcast. Yeah, we've had a podcast, and we've also had a video on this. Descriptive analytics, this is looking into the past and making decisions about the past. Now in descriptive analytics, instead of using equations and maybe doing some sort of BI or business intelligence output, what you're doing is you're using some algorithms to visualize the data so that a human can look at it. And sometimes a human can interpret it in better ways than a mathematical equation. So we have descriptive analytics. Then we have diagnostic analytics, and this is when you're maybe trying to do some solving. You're trying to diagnose a particular problem, and so again, this is generally going to be looking for outliers, or you're going to be solving or optimizing in some particular way. So that's looking in the data, and you're making observations on the past. Now, looking at analytics in the real time, or I should say in the present, you've got two different types. You've got the real-time analysis, and you have rules engines. Now, rules engines are generally what's named in IoT platforms. They use what they call rules engines, and they're just very simple logical operators that are working within data. And generally what you're looking at is some sort of partitioning, whether the data point is within or without or outside of some transformation, generally a linear transformation, whether it's a min and max, I guess you could look at it that way, or it could be some functional thing. Whereas real-time analysis may be a little bit more computationally intensive, and as opposed to being, let's say, in the cloud, where there isn't that, where there just isn't the capability to be real-time, it may actually be in the fog layer, or say distributed closer to the edge. So there's maybe doing some calculations that are a little bit more, I guess, more complex than just seeing whether it's within a bounding box or some other function like that. Looking in the future, we've got predictive and prescriptive analytics. And here again, all different types of analytics, you are basically doing signature matching. You have a model, and that is a certain view of the data. And then you look at your current data in the same view, and you match. And by doing matching, you're mathematically matching. I like to think of them as shapes, but you're mathematically matching the data from today to the data from some accumulated data from yesterday that caused some result. And if they are matching, then you're going to make the assumption that the same result is going to occur with your data. So that's where you get predictive maintenance, for example. Prescriptive maintenance or prescriptive analytics is doing the same thing, and then actually closing the loop and then making changes within the system to prevent that outcome from happening, that result from happening, if that's indeed what you want. So with the exception of the uninitiated, or with the exception, I should say, of the initiated in understanding analytics and what it's capable of, and that was really just the short discussion there was really just on the technicalities of analytics. Then really it's the business values and trying to get your head around what those analytics can provide from a business point of view. And I think that's the problem. At least with the first situation with the design house, most of the companies or most of their clients just don't understand the benefits of analytics. And it's really difficult for a firm to explain these concepts when they're so different. They're just different, and they're not within the current wheelhouse of the business managers that are making the decisions. And so the thing that people gravitate to is what they understand, and again is this connected product situation. So they're just having a real difficult time selling these concepts. And for the product company, now if we go back to my client, the question really comes down to is, should the analytics be within the minimally viable product, within the first release product? Now, in both those situations, I believe that, and that's where the title of this podcast comes from, is I believe that the answer is they can be step 2. They don't necessarily have to be within the first deployment, whether it's a telematics type deployment, pilot I should say, or within a product. It can be a step 2 situation. What I've seen, and we've talked about even on this podcast with different guests, is I like to call it the thin edge of the wedge of the sale. So making your initial sale, focus it on the efficiency aspect of IoT. Now, efficiencies, this can make the product better. It could be related to how you operate the product. It could be related to how you service the product. But it's something that the bean counters, the managers can understand. It's something that bonuses are paid on. And so I think from a sales point of view, instead of trying to sell, this grandiose new thing that IoT creates using this technology called, big data analytics, using data science, I think it's just a better sale to again go in and think about it from an efficiency point of view. Now, on the product side, many companies, in fact, all companies that I've personally worked with, don't have that skill set or don't have enough of that skill set to necessarily realize the true, vision or the true value of what analytics can provide to their particular product. So in that case, I think it's okay to be a part 2 or a second phase, but it's really important that analytics is integrated into the design phase of the product. So when we go through it, the way I do it, when I go through the requirements, we're looking at 3 different types of requirements. We're looking at information requirements, and again, that goes back to that value that I was talking about before. All incremental value is coming from that information. We look at application requirements. And then the third part is we look at analytics requirements. It's very important that you initially think about this, even if you're not going to be implementing it. It's a romantic notion that for people to believe that they're going to go into this huge data lake that they've accumulated over all this, over this period of time. And then magically they're going to go in with a data scientist and they're going to find all this value. It's like they're finding gold in them there hills. It may happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but I'm going to say that it's very rare. In fact, if you do want to be able to collect value in that data, you need to design for it. Now, I always think about this in terms of design, sell, build. And so it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to sell it, or I should say it's going to be part of your first product, but it needs to be part of that. It needs to be part of your requirements because there are a lot of dependencies if you think about it. And if you don't include it in the requirements from the beginning, even if you don't implement it, if you don't include it in the requirements at the very beginning, you can run into some problems. Just think about the sensors for start. Now, let's say that, and again, there's different dimensions that you're going to want to look at: the requirements, the information requirements, the application requirements, and the analytics requirements. But let's say that you can get a lot of value by correlating the weather with the operation of your machine. If you don't think about that value and all you're doing initially is developing your IoT product without the consideration of that weather, and let's say it has to be really localized, then you may, like temperature, then you may not include the right sensors in your product. If you're just thinking about turning this sump pump on and off, and that's probably not a good example, some sprinkler system on and off in the middle of a field, independent of what the temperature is or the weather is, let's say the atmospheric pressure, then going in later and adding those sensors obviously are going to be a little bit of a problem. So that's just a simple example, but I think it's a profound one, that you need to think about the data in advance, even if you're not going to be implementing in your product from an application point of view, and particularly from a modeling and a analytics point of view. you do need to think through it because you don't want, it's going to be very difficult to retrofit hardware, let alone software. So if we go through, some other examples, the application protocol that you want to use, the OT network, the operational network, the cloud, and then ultimately the platform, there's all ramifications in each one of these for whether or not you're considering all the information or all the data that you want to collect, again, to transform it into information. And even if you look at the database, what type of database structure are you going to have? What type of analytics applications are you going to use? And again, that's going to come back to the architecture of your product. So again, it's very important to consider the information or the data requirements or the data analytics requirements in advance of building your product, even if the client and even if the customer, or even if internally you're not going to be releasing it on the first rev. So make the efficiency sale first and then collect the data. And I like the term, I've heard it before, where data is the new oil. So make the efficiency sale with the thin edge of the wedge first in a way that the client can understand, and then collect the data. On the product side, develop the product by designing in, so it's another discussion is security by design, but this I guess is analytics by design. By designing in the analytics from the beginning, collect the data. You don't necessarily have to be doing anything with it if you don't have the capabilities to, again, transform it into something useful. But in both cases, what you're doing is you're collecting the data, you're creating some data pools, you're creating a data lake, whatever terminology you want to use, and then you can get at it later. So in the case of the product, if you think about it, or let's say it's developed in-house, then for second phase, you can implement the analytics and you have the data there waiting for you. If you're a client, you can go back. If you're working with a client, like in the case of the design house, you've collected the data. You can then go back to them and say, oh, by the way, for a second phase, we've got all this data and let's look at the way that we can transform it using analytics. And in the case of the product, if you're selling an IoT product, again, step 2, which is why it's okay. Step 2 could be then an upgrade. It could be some sort of an upgrade, or it could even be something that you give away for free. It just depends on your business model. But you can address the analytics. You can address the analytics later. Now, this can be kind of and perhaps it is an oversimplified view of that particular world. Because yes, there's going to be extra costs associated with collecting this data, even in the case of the sensors. Storing the data, transporting the data, there are going to be extra costs. And so again, it's maybe simplistic, but there's going to have to be some convincing, easier if it's internal, but if your client's having to pay some incremental value when they're not actually being able to utilize it, incremental costs, I should say, then it might be a little bit more challenging. But I think if you squint your eyes, more the point that I'm trying to make is first think about the difference between a connected product, a smart product, and an IoT product. Think about where you're generating value. And then even if you're not able to implement the internet part of the IoT product initially, and that is utilizing the internet for, in this particular case, analytics, or even gathering data. In the case of when I was gathering the temperature or the stock price data, then even if you can't do it initially, plan it, design it in such a way that you can in the future, because it's going to cost a lot more to scrap everything and start again. And it's very difficult to retrofit, specifically hardware, but even software. It's very difficult to retrofit this stuff later. So in the real world, it may be a little bit more cost and maybe a little bit more energy, but I think you need to convince, whether that's an internal argument or an external argument, think about convincing your client or your teammates within your organization to design the data analytics in from the beginning. Analytics by design.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that monologue. This podcast goes vertical, deep diving into different topics each week. If you prefer a more horizontal and structured approach to learning IoT business and its orbiting technologies, check out my book IoT Inc., published by McGraw-Hill, or become a certified IoT professional by completing the ICIP training and certification program. For details, just go to www.iot-inc.com. Also go to www.iot-inc.com for an analysis of this episode, links to things that were mentioned during the episode, and very importantly, the episode's PDF transcript. Just search for the name of the episode or the guest. If you're new to this podcast, subscribe. That way you'll get every week's episode delivered straight to your device. Or, if you've been listening for a while, there are 3 ways you can support the show. You can leave a rating or a review on iTunes. Just go to iot-inc.com/iTunes. It only takes 1 click to leave a rating, a little bit longer to leave a review. You can share it on social. I'm on LinkedIn, to a lesser extent on Twitter. And of course, you can support this show by buying my book, IoT Inc., or the ICIP training and certification program. It's how I pay the bills. Next week's episode is Descriptive Analytics, Discovering the Story Behind the Data with Dave Rubel. I hope you can join me then. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Until next week, may your path to IoT business be a 2-step one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.